أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة. رسول من الله يتلو صحفا مطهرة فيها كتب قيمة. وما تفرق الذين أوتوا الكتاب إلا من بعد ما جاءتهم البينة. وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك دين القيمة. إن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين في نار جهنم خالدين فيها أولئك هم شر البرية. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك هم خير البرية. جزاؤهم عند ربهم جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا. رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه ذلك لمن خشي ربه. صدق الله العظيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أما بعد. We welcome you all again to this session of Tadkirah, and we welcome you with the greeting Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bi-idhnillah, our Sheikh will continue from where he stopped with the explanation and the treating of the book that we started with last week. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to increase us in knowledge and make the knowledge very beneficial for us in this world and useful for us in the akhirah.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونتوكل عليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد عبده ورسوله أدى الأمانة وبلغ الرسالة وقاتل الكفار وعبد ربه حتى أتاه اليقين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. You are welcome back to another edition of the program Tadkirah. As we all know, Tadkirah means reminder, and we commenced this program last week. Is a program centers on the discussion of the book written by Imam Munnawawi, the Sharh made by the contemporary scholar of Sunnah, Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih Al Uthaymeen. Going through our last week's discussion, we started with that famous hadith, which is usually called Hadith 1, wherein the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was reported to have said that innamal a'malu bin niyyat wa innama likulli mri'in ma nawa faman kanat hijratuhu ila Allahi wa rasulihi fahijratuhu ila Allahi wa rasulihi wa man kanat hijratuhu lid-dunya yusibuha aw imra'atin yankihuha fahijratuhu ila ma hajara ilayhi. As we interpreted this hadith last week, innamal a'malu bin niyyat, all actions come with intentions. That is, every action must be preceded by a particular intention. Wa innama likulli mri'in ma nawa, and that every person shall have what he intends behind his action. فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, whoever had migrated for the sake of Allah and His Messenger, فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, his migration shall be for Allah and His Messenger. وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِلدُّنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا, and whoever had migrated because of worldly gains he intends to attain, أَوْ إِمْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا, or because of a woman he intends to marry. In another narration of this hadith, it says, أَوْ إِمْرَأَةٍ يَتَزَوَّجُهَا, which implies the same thing. Because of a woman he intends to marry, فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ, he shall find the reward of his migration where it is intended. We made a lot of explanations, an extensive one, about the beginning of these traditions, or the whole of these hadith, as explained by Sheikh Muhammad Salih, or Muhammad bin Salih Al Uthaymeen. And inshallah, today we shall continue with the discussion. And Sheikh Uthaymeen, while giving the exegesis or explanation of this particular hadith, tried to divide migration, that is hijrah, into three ways. We know that this hadith is talking about intention, but the discussion which had commenced from the area of the theme of intention in the Sharh of Riyaadus Saaliheen of Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen later moved to the meaning of migration. If you want to migrate from one place to the other. So Sheikh Uthaymeen now divided migration into three. And he called it Al-Hijra takunu lil-amal, wa takunu lil-amil, wa takun lil-makan. One may migrate because on account of an action. And there could also be a form of migration because on account of the person performing the action. وَتَكُونُ لِلْمَكَانِ, and migration can also come on account of a place. Okay, the first one he discussed in the book, Al-Qism al-Awwal, the first division, which is Hijratul Makan, which is migration on account of a space, on account of a place. According to Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen, he said, وَهِيَ أَن يَنْتَقِلَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ مَكَانٍ تَكْثُرُ فِيهِ الْمَعَاصِي وَيَكْثُرُ فِيهِ الْفُسُوقِ. For example, for a Muslim who migrates from a place where sin and corruption is prevalent, where criminalities and immoralities are equally prevalent, one now migrates from that place to a place where it is less. وَرُبَّمَا يَكُونُ مِنْ بَلَدِ الْكُفْرِ إِلَى بَلَدِ لَا يُوجَدْ فِيهِ ذَلِكَ. This is very common when people try to migrate from a state of disbelief. Maybe you are living in a nation which is Balad al-Kufr. Balad al-Kufr is a nation where kufr, disbelief in Allah, is rampant, or a nation characterized by immorality. When you think of migrating from that kind of place to a place where it is not common, but the one that is very common among people, that is more dominant, is أعظمه الهجرة من بلد الكفر إلى بلد الإسلام. When people think of migrating from a space dominated by kufr, disbelief in Allah, to a place where Islam is conveniently practiced. This one, according to scholars, أنه تجب الهجرة من بلد الكفر إلى بلد الإسلام. Scholars of Islam are of the opinion that it is obligatory for a Muslim to think of migrating, or perhaps to migrate from a place where kufru is the order of the day, disbelief in Allah. This includes a place where immorality prevails, a place where corruption also prevails, a place where it becomes so difficult to exercise righteousness. Scholars of Islam have always said that, especially when someone who is righteous, who is a Muslim, when he finds it difficult to display his Islam. Of course, there are some communities in the world like that. We have heard of many where women find it difficult to wear their hijab. And when I talk about hijab, I'm talking about the minimum requirements of hijab. Take, for example, a country like France. We have heard in the news that it becomes difficult for a Muslim woman to wear niqab in France. In a situation like this can be based on the opinion of scholars. If, for example, the woman is someone whose faith is strongly attached to making niqab an obligation, and she feels uncomfortable uncovering her face in that society, then it becomes incumbent on her to migrate from France to a place. It might even be somewhere around Europe, like in the UK, for example, or perhaps to a Muslim-dominated area where niqab is permissible. But for someone who does not see the use of niqab as an obligation, and she sees that niqab is being made, is forbidden in the environment, then it is advisable that the person should stay around. This is not only about niqab. There are some societies, especially in the past, we have some communist society. I'm not sure if we still have such society in the world again, where it becomes a sin, it becomes unlawful for a Muslim to observe Salat. In fact, this is non-negotiable. When a Muslim finds himself in a society where he's not allowed to observe Salat or to fast in the month of Ramadan, then it becomes obligatory that he must migrate from the society. إذا كان الإنسان لا يستطيع أن يظهر دينه, when someone finds it difficult to, display his Islamic identity, then that society or community or nation becomes a wrong place for him to stay. So, but if someone, is capable of displaying, even though it's a kufr society, like some part of Europe, but nobody bothers you or troubles you about your Islamic identity. You can wear hijab and you can observe salat and some other things. But for the fact that it is not an Islamic society, you understand? So in that situation, according to the opinion of our Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen, it is not compulsory for a Muslim in that society to migrate. I want us to get two things clear. In an environment where it becomes difficult to display or manifest Islamic identity, when you are not allowed to identify publicly with Islam, you are not allowed to observe fast, you are not allowed to dress in Islamic way, You are not allowed to wear hijab. You are not allowed to observe salat. It becomes obligatory. It is wajib alayk that you must migrate from that kind of society. But if, for example, you are not disturbed and bothered, and you are not troubled, you can display or identify with Islam publicly, and you can display your Islamic identity. But the only fact is that that society is not an Islamic society. It's a kufru society. It is although advisable, but it is not obligatory that you must move away from the society. So, and this is one thing that we must understand. فكذلك إذا كان الإنسان من أهل الإسلام ومن بلاد المسلمين فإنه لا يجوز له أن يسافر إلى بلد الكفر لما كان في ذلك من الخطر على دينه وعلى أخلاقه. But if someone is born, or perhaps someone is living in a Muslim society where Islam is the order of the day, of course, it might not be a perfect one. Like those of us in Nigeria, whether in the north of Nigeria or in the southwest of Nigeria, those who are in Ghana, those who are in Togo, and outside of Africa, maybe some part of Europe. I mean, that where Islam, because there are some parts of Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, where Islam is equally an order. We have a place like Chechnya in Eastern Europe. We have a place like, and some other places where Islam is the order, or perhaps in some parts of the Arab countries, or in some part of Asia. If one finds himself there and Islam is permissible, nobody disturbs you from practicing Islam. La yajuzu lahu an yusafira ila baladil kufr. It is forbidden that he should now walk towards deliberately migrating to a state of kufr, where kufr is the order. لما كان في ذلك من الخطر على دينه, because of the danger involved, which may negatively impact on his religious practice. وعلى أخلاقه, which may also infect his character. ولما في ذلك من إضاعة المال ولما في ذلك من تقوية الاقتصاد الكفار. Another thing which makes it forbidden, according to our scholar, is that number one, if a Muslim chooses to migrate from a Muslim society, I wouldn't want to use an Islamic society. If we talk about Islamic society, we may be referring to a society that is purely Islamic and where Sharia, the law of Allah, is practically operative. But we call it a Muslim society either because it's a Muslim-dominated area of the world, or perhaps is a place where Muslims are at ease and they have the convenience and comfort of practicing their religion. So it is unlawful that a Muslim who is born or who is living in that kind of society should think of migrating to a society that is purely kufru, where Islam is hindered or the practice of Islam is hindered. It is unlawful for a Muslim to do that. And now, why is it made unlawful? Number one is that it may constitute danger to the practice of his religion. That is, it may endanger the practice of his religion and his Islamic identity. Then number two is that it may, the society, I mean, with the sociological factor, may infect the character, the manners, and the public disposition of such a Muslim. And this is even easier when it comes to children. It may infect. And one thing about the Jahiliyyah infection is that it affects you and you may not even know that you've been affected. And that's why Imam Abu Hanifa said that a Muslim in relation to Jahiliyyah is like a pure white that is spread, a pure white cloth that is spread. A Muslim a Muslim in relation to Jahiliyyah is like a pure white that is spread. And this pure white, you continue to walk around it, going and coming around the pure white, carrying naked fire. You are carrying a lantern consisting of a naked fire, and you are going. It's not in the globe, it's not the fluorescent, and it is not covered. It is not illuminated. But naked fire, you carry it left and right, going and coming, on and forth, beside a pure white cloth. Imam Abu Hanifa said that this white clothes, the whiteness and the purity of the clothes may be compromised. But those who are looking at the white clothes may not even know that it's already losing the quality of its whiteness. That is exactly the analogy and the similitude of someone who is living in a kufru society. His character, his attitude, his manners may be infected with the social jahiliyyah of the environment. This is another reason why it is compulsory that a Muslim must never contemplate migrating to a Muslim living in an Islamic society, a Muslim society shouldn't contemplate moving to a kufru society or a society where jahiliyyah is operative and is the dominant order of the day. Then another thing apart from this is walima fi dhalika min ida'ati malihi. Then another thing is that it is assumed that he's wasting his money. It's extravagance. And it's extravagance and it's a way of wasting his money. Lima fi dhalika min takwiyat al-iqtisad al-kuffar. Because by migrating to the country of the kuffar, is strengthening the economy of the kuffar. Those who go to the UK, those who go to the US, those who go to Australia and some of these countries, they make money. Some of them may sell properties. Some of them may have to seek loan. Some of them may, all the savings they have acquired over, in a Muslim country, and they travel, they take it to a kufru society. And by going, most of the things, the spending, the expenditure, by so doing, they strengthen the economy of the kuffar. And when they start working, we have heard about the how frightening is the tax in some of these European countries. So by working with your energy and paying the tax to the government, you strengthen their economy. And the money they acquire is what they use to oppress the Muslim nations. We can easily remember what is happening in Palestine today. Most of these European countries and the Western nations who are supportive of Israel's aggression against the helpless people of Palestine, the money they have acquired definitely will be part of the money they've gotten from the believers. So Muslims who are living in those society must have, in one way or the other, assisted in strengthening their economy. And they've gotten the money and they support Israel. Some of them support Israel in form of aids, and some of them, export ammunitions to Israel. And this bullet that is purchased with part of the economy, money used for purchasing these bullets, these ammunitions, may likely be money spent by Muslims to strengthen their economy. So Sheikh said that that by migrating to their country, you are strengthening their economy. Whereas and whereas we have been commanded to be harsh and hard on the kuffar, and this is very clear in what is stated in the Holy Quran, as cited by Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 123, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, qatilul ladhina yalunakum minal kuffar, waliyajidu fiikum ghilzatum, وَعَلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, O you believers, قَاتِلُوا الَّذِينَ يَلُونَكُم مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ. Fight those who are close to you among the disbelievers. Fight those who are close to you, closely related to you among the unbelievers. وَلِيَجِدُوا فِيكُمْ غِلْظَةً, and let them find in you harshness and hardness. Be harsh with them. وَعَلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. And also be conscious of the fact that Allah always identifies with the righteous. Then another verse of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ba'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, jahidil kuffar wal munafiqin, waglid alayhim, wa ma'wahum jahannam, wa bisal masir." Jahidil kuffar wal munafiqin. Wage the jihad upon the disbelievers and the hypocrites. Waglid alayhim, and be harsh with them. Wa ma'wahum jahannama, wa bisal masir. The end result of their sins, of their criminality, is hellfire. And that is the worst thing that could happen to anybody. These are verses of the Quran wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala categorically says that we shouldn't be compassionate with the disbelievers. We should rather be harsh on them. In another verse cited by Sheikh Uthaymeen, the same in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 120, Allah also says, وَلَا يَطَعُونَ مَوْتِيًا يَغِيظُ الْكُفَّارَ وَلَا يَنَالُونَ مِنْ عَدُوٍّ نَيْلًا إِلَّا كُتِبَ لَهُمْ بِهِ عَمَلٌ صَالِحٌ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. صدق الله العظيم. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assures the believers in the Holy Quran? Allah says, وَلَا يَطَعُونَ مَوْتِيًا يَغِيظُ الْكُفَّارَ. You will never make an effort to enrage the disbelievers or to make the disbelievers angry or to inflict pain on them. وَلَا يَنَالُونَ مِنْ عَدُوٍّ نَيْلًا. Neither will you suffer any kind of negative effect from the enemies. إِلَّا كُتِبَ لَهُمْ بِهِ عَمَلٌ صَالِحٌ. Allah says, except that Allah will write for them, that is the believers, Allah will write for them a reward of good deed. Inna Allah la yudi'u ajra al-muhsinin. Allah does not waste the reward of the righteous. So all of these clearly shows that a Muslim shouldn't deliberately put himself in a situation of strengthening the disbelievers for whatever reason. However we see it, in whatever perception we look at it, as far as Islam is concerned, the unbelievers are perceived as the enemies of Allah and the enemies of the believers. The enemies of Allah and the enemies of the believers. If we feel that by being compassionate to them or with them, we may win their hearts to Islam, yes, this might be possible. When we take the approach of dawah, but this does not remove the fact that why a non-Muslim remains a disbeliever is declared in the Holy Quran as the enemy of Allah and the enemy of the believers. وَغْلِظْ عَلَيْهِمْ. And we are asked to be harsh with them, especially those who are hostile to us. And unless you take to the approach of their religious practice or you adopt their culture, Quran categorically makes it clear that وَلَنْ تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. Neither the Jews nor the Christians will ever be pleased with you except you adopt their way of life. So when you now consciously and deliberately intend to migrate to their land, what is expected of you is that you must adopt their culture, you must imbibe their civilization. Even that you are living in a Muslim country, your orientation is yet corrupted because of the dominant cultural value. You have your own culture, but it has been, it has been corrupted by Western orientation. How much more leaving your country consciously and deliberately to live in their country. So that's why scholars of Islam want greatly seriously about this. And Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen now conclude by saying, Fal kafir ayyakana, that a disbeliever, whoever he is, sawa kana bin al-nasara, whether he's a Christian or min al-Yahud, or perhaps is a Jew, or min al-mulhidin, or is even an atheist, a godless person, or to sama bil Islam, whether he publicly identifies with Islam, or lam yattasim bil Islam, or perhaps he distances himself from Islam, al-kafir adu lillahi wa li kitabihi wa li rasulihi wa lil mu'minina jami'a. A disbeliever in Islam is enemy of Allah, enemy of the book of Allah, enemy of the messenger of Allah, and enemy to all the believers. Of course, this what we learn from Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen is not my view, is what our teachers have taught us and which we strongly believe in. Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen is one of the recent scholars of Islam that must be trusted. You know, Imam al-Nawawi had written this book, Riyadus Saaliheen, many centuries ago. And many scholars, both contemporary and in the past, have taken their time, may Allah reward them all, to write the Sharh, exegesis and explanations of each of the hadiths contained in the book Riyadus Saaliheen. And one of the most reliable of these Sharh, of this explanation, is the one being studied presently, the one composed and written by Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih Al Uthaymeen. And we do not have the intellectual capacity to interpret those hadiths effectively and efficiently, except that we rely strongly on the interpretation given by our eminent scholars. So that should be very clear to us, is the truth. Now, the conclusion of that discussion is that la yajuz lil insan an yusafira ila balad al kufr illa bi shurut al thalatha. Now, if it is now said that we can migrate to the country of the disbelievers, but Sheikh Al Uthaymeen said, okay, there are some necessities, daruri, which may require that we are permitted by our religion to consider before migrating to the land of the kuffar. That is, there are some factors which may necessitate we may be forgiven on account of about 3 factors. The first factor mentioned by Sheikh is الشرط الأول أن يكون عنده علم يدفع به الشبهات. Someone who think of migrating to live. When we talk about migration, I'm not talking about, traveling there for a business or traveling for schooling. I'm talking about thinking of relocating to live in the midst of the kuffar. So Sheikh Uthaymeen said, number 1 is an yakuna indahu ilmun yadfa bihi shubahat. Someone who wants to go and live in a kufru society, be it China, Australia, you talk about even the United States of America, despite the fact that we have a number of Muslim communities there. And there are countries that could be worse than Western Europe. There are countries in Eastern Europe that, that could be worse. In their hostility to Islamic identity. So now the scholar said, number 1 is an yakuna indahu ilmu yadfa bihi shubahat. Someone who contemplates relocating to a kufru society to live there must have the knowledge of Islam, yadfa bihi shubahat, with which he can prevent himself from falling into doubts and ambiguities. And that's why you hear from many people living in some of these countries asking you questions that, this is the problem we have. What about this? What about that? You know, it can never be convenient. And you know, among the things that that actually compel us, or perhaps that normally put pressure upon us to contemplate relocating to a kufru society? Among these things is economic factor. We all know that. You now go to a kufru society, it becomes so difficult for you to observe salat, or perhaps it becomes so difficult for you to display Islamic identity, to wear hijab. All of these, whereas, are obligations upon you. Number three, it becomes so difficult for you to observe the fast, whereas the time is tickling towards your grief. Whether you are in your country, I mean a country where Muslims, where the Islamic value operates, or you are in a kufru society where Islamic value is discouraged, where it is not so easy to practice Islam, the day that is decreed against you to die is when you're going to die. So what about death? So when we now think that, okay, I'll be going to that country to make some money, then I rush back. Then on arrival in that country, you find yourself compromising a lot of things. You compromise a lot of things about Islamic values. You compromise. Yes, including obligations. You may have to reduce the size of your hijab. Or perhaps in some occasions, you remove your hijab completely. Can you imagine? Whereas it's an obligation. Or, on the other hand, you may have to relax your consistency in the mosque. You don't have the opportunity of being consistent with salat. Or perhaps you may have to concede defeat by refusing to fast some days of Ramadan. Or perhaps you may have to drink in a public restaurant with cups used for drinking alcohol. Or perhaps you may have to eat with a plate with which swine and porks are prepared. Or perhaps the same pot used for preparing swine is the same pot they use for preparing your beef. And you find yourself in this environment, and you may even find yourself in an environment where you are, it is not announced that the meat you are eating is not actually the beef, but rather is the swine. And you continue to live that, no, I think this is going to be daruri. It is not daruri, because daruri, in fact, does not come with a deliberate action. It's not what you deliberately choose for yourself. It is not daruri. It's not a necessity. But rather, it is a deliberate way of choosing to commit a sin. So for that reason, one must have as Muslim, one must have the knowledge, the adequate knowledge, which can assist you in living in that society, and which can prevent you from falling into ambiguities and things of doubt. Especially for the fact, as expressed by Sheikh Uthaymeen, that the kuffar are good at causing doubts in the believers. One of the things they enjoy most is to cause doubt in the believers. So you have to go, and you go with the knowledge, equipped with the knowledge that can protect you against this. This is one factor that is, said that we must watch out for before thinking of migrating to a kufru society. The factor that the person who wants to migrate must have the knowledge that can assist him in navigating the questionable environment. Then Sharh Thani, then the second condition is an yakuna indahu din yakmegi min ash-shahawat. you must be religious conscious. You must be godly conscious. You must be ideologically sound. This is far from being a mere Muslim. You must be religiously conscious in such a way that when you find yourself in that society, you will not be carried away by voluptuous materialism with which the Kufru society is usually characterized. We know this is one thing. I mean, the kuffar, of course, there are Muslim countries too where you see some luxury and you see things that can be identified as materialism. But yet you still find around you, some elements of Islamic values. When, for example, you find yourself in some corridors of Saudi Arabia, you can see some luxury and materialism. But at the same time, you will still find yourself around masajid. You will not find a place where swine or pork is eaten. You will not find yourself where there are beer parlors. When you find yourself around the cafe, what you find there are halal things. So you will not find yourself where musicals and lyrics are the orders of the day. Though you can find luxury, you can find materialism, but you can equally identify with spirituality in that society. But in some Kufru society, it's all about voluptuous materialism. So for this reason, لأن الإنسان الذي ليس عنده دين إذا ذهب إلى بلاد الكفر, someone who is not religiously conscious, he doesn't have the religious consciousness. If he should think of going to the land of the kuffar and Ramaza, he will backslide. He will backslide because he will find himself around those things that are not permissible. Take, for example, bars, cafes, where alcohols are drunk, brothels, where promiscuity is prevalent. Even sometimes, he may even, with the recent events and occurrences and legislations in some European nations, he may even find himself in the area of homosexualism, lesbianism, LGBTQ, and which others. And we know that it is even more dangerous to contemplate living in a Kufru society, in a Western society today, than how it was in the past. If we believe that we can survive it with the level of Islamic consciousness we claim to possess, what about our children? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. But anyway, Sheikh Uthaymeen made it categorically clear that with Islamic consciousness, you might be able to hold yourself together with a kind of creedal solidity and a kind of ideological maturity. You'll be able to protect yourself from being distracted into sins and immoralities. Then number 3 factor is أن يكون محتاجا إلى ذلك مثل أن يكون مريضا يحتاج إلى السفر إلى بلاد الكفر للاستشفاء. Another thing is when it is necessitated by a kind of sickness. Maybe someone is sick and the only place, and we know the best of places where you can have access to the best medical service is in some of these European nations, some of this Kufru society. Is quite unfortunate and is really pathetic. But if someone is now sick and there is a necessity for traveling to a Kufru society to seek healing, then it is permissible. But it's not only about seeking medical attention alone. أو يكون محتاجا إلى علم لا يوجد في بلاد الإسلام. Also, if one think of acquiring a certain knowledge, you want to go and read a course that is not available in a Muslim society, or perhaps it's even available in a Muslim society, but it is not detailed, or perhaps it is detailed, but the certificate to be acquired in that Kufru society becomes better recognized, or perhaps it is better taught, the knowledge is better delivered in that society, then for someone to think of going there is equally permissible. And all of these are daruri. One specializes in that area of studies when someone goes to the kufru world. One now goes there, or one is going to a kufru society for business purposes. So, for example, someone who travels to the UK, who travels to Australia, who travels to China for business reason, there's nothing wrong in this. Even this one had happened in the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallam, when the companions would have to travel the distance that would take them to a society that was yet to welcome Islam. So in that kind of situation, it is permissible. They go for business. In the same way, you go for knowledge acquisition. In the same way, you go for medical attention. So now, what can we deduce from this opinion of our Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen? We can clearly deduce that if there is a kind of school of a knowledge or a study, an area, a discipline, an area of study or a discipline which knowledge can be acquired in a Muslim country, we need not travel to a Kufru society if we can find it. And if we can equally find medical services provided in a Muslim environment adequately, we need not travel to a Kufru society to acquire it. On this one, I want to express a very high level of skepticism. I am skeptical that someone can find adequate medical service delivery in a Muslim society. And this is one of the weaknesses of the contemporary Muslim. It's quite unfortunate. So this becomes more necessary that one is seeking medical attention to travel to a Kufru society. As for knowledge too, if the knowledge, there is a kind of a school of knowledge or perhaps an area of study that can only be acquired in a Kufru society, then one should travel. Then as for business, yes, if your business will have to take you as far as the China, as far as Europe, as far as the Americans, then there's nothing bad in all of these. And because these things cannot be, you can't stay at home and do all those things. But the scholar says, you go, then you do your business, and you return home. Al-Muhim, the most important thing, is that there is something that takes you to that Kufru society. And that thing must be as rational and reasonable, as evidence-based as discussed. So for that, the Sheikh now made an interesting observation that on this, أرى أن الذين يسافرون إلى بلد الكفر من أجل السياحة فقط أرى أنهم آثمون. Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al-Uthaymeen said, I got to know that those who travel to Kufru society, when we talk about Kufru society, I don't need to mention any country. Those who go there, لأجل السياحة, as tourists, for tourism alone, for just tourism, fakat alone, that my opinion is that they are sinners. You want to go for tourism and you can't find your way to Cairo, you can't find your way to Turkey, and you can't find your way to even to Chechnya, you can't find your way to a Muslim-dominated environment, you can't find your way to wherever the law of Islam is operative. You can't find your way to Dubai or Sharjah or any part of the Emirates. And you can't find your way to Qatar. You can find your way to Saudi Arabia. You can't find your way to any of the Asian Muslim countries. And you feel the best way to enjoy yourself for tourism is to go to the United States of America. You believe the best way is to go to any of the islands situated in any of the European nations. This may not be allowed in Islam, according to the opinion of our scholars. It is one thing that is highly discouraged, because one of the reasons why this one is done, and the Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen perceived the person as a sinner who goes to a kufru society for tourism, and he says every penny that you spend there becomes haram. Everything you perceive there, فَإِنَّهُ حَرَامُ عَلَيْهِمْ وَإِضَاعَةٌ لِمَالِهِمْ وَسَيُحَاسَبُونَ عَنْهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ حِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ مَكَانًا يَتَفْسِحُونَ فِيهِ. He said, every penny you spend there, every moment you spend there becomes haram for you. وَإِضَاعَةٌ لِمَالِهِمْ, and it's a way of wasting your money. وَسَيُحَاسَبُونَ عَنْهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, and such people will be held to account on the day of judgment. This is the opinion of Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen. Of all the explanations I've read out so far from the book Riyaadus Saaliheen, as explained and taught by Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen, I have not personally expressed my opinion, because who am I? I don't even have any opinion why interpreting the work of Sheikh Muhammad Salih Al Uthaymeen. We can only talk about the opinion of scholars. We do not have any opinion. And the scholar, the Sheikh explained this further. حين لا يجدون إلا أعمالهم لأن هؤلاء يضيعون أوقاتهم. All of these people, they have gone there to waste their money, to waste their time, and to destroy their own character. A kufru society, while preparing spaces and grounds for tourists in their country, can only make it comfortable with the rules of kufru, with the rules and principles of immorality, with the rules and principles of sins, with the rules and principles of corruption. When they are, they are designing places. For example, let me give you a very short example, an analogy. I'll give you now. And to know that when it comes to tourism, each country, each society will prepare its ground and its society according to its own culture for its own people. I'll give you an example. There is nowhere you will go in some Muslim countries, especially those countries, Muslim countries of the Gulf. No society will you go without finding a place for ablution and prayer. You will find a place for ablution. It will be provided for you. Even right from boarding their airplane. Egypt here, we commence the trip with dua with safar, prayer for the trip. Saudi Arabia airline, we commence the trip with dua with safar. And I'm sure recently, Turkish airline, known as Tadkirah, we commence the trip with dua with safar. Thus, you are traveling. And when you get to their country, all the places of comfort, however luxurious, prepared for you, will equally be accompanied with religious services. But when you go to a country, a godless society, a country that is not aware that Muhammad had ever flourished or had ever lived, you wouldn't expect them. And that is why even to eat in such society becomes so difficult. I remember the other day, I just traveled to the east of Nigeria here, not outside the country. I traveled to the east of Nigeria here, and it was time for me to eat. and there was no way, no restaurant. So now, every restaurant I entered, it became so bothersome to identify which one was not cooking beef together with pork. So I had to ask, even, you know that in the east of Nigeria, how easy do you think it will be to get a restaurant where the animal sold there, where the beef had been slaughtered, the beef of the animal had been slaughtered with the name of Allah? Let's now pretend as if I don't want to ask, what about the meat I want to eat that had not been cooked in the same pot with the pork? And I have a very funny environment. Even in a place as Muslim as Lagos State, I found myself sometimes ago, I think about last year, lodging in an hotel. They call it Radinzi View or Radinzi Blue, somewhere situated in Ikeja. And I lodged. And it was time for breakfast, which happened to be, buffet. And I had served myself in a plate. I sat down to eat. As I was about eating, a man quickly rushed to me, one of the chef, and he shouted, he said, "I can see that you look like a Muslim." I said, "Yes, of course, I'm a Muslim." He said, "What you have served yourself is pork." In fact, despite the fact that of course, in that kind of environment, the plates I used to serve myself the rice I wanted to eat must have been used to serve pork for someone, or someone must have used it to serve pork. It became so difficult for me, despite the fact that I had paid for this breakfast. I had to let go. Now consider that and compare it with a country that is absolutely on kufr, that is zero on Islam. How do you think you can survive? And like I have said, the time to our death, to our grave, is ticking so fast. So, and the Sheikh now warned us, is that you do that, you are risking your Islam, you are risking your religion, you are risking the practice and your loyalty to Allah, and you are risking your grave. And there are society, Sheikh said, there are society la yasma fiha sawt al-mu'adhdhin wala dhikr dhakir wa innama yasma fiha abwaq al-yahud wa nawakis. There are some of this society where you can never hear the voice of adhan, wala dhikr dhakir, and you can never hear the remembrance of Allah. Nobody, you never hear anything that carries Islamic value. وَإِنَّمَا يَسْمَعْ فِيهَا بُوَاقِ الْيَهُودِ وَنَوَاقِيسِ النَّصَارَى. All those things that have to do, the music, the sounds, the voices, or whatever identifiable with the Jewish culture and the Christian civilization, is what you find around. So it's not encouraging. And it concludes, وَهَذَا مِنَ الْبَلَاءِ الَّذِي يَحِلُّ وَهَذَا مِنَ الْبَلَاءِ الَّذِي يَحِلُّ اللَّهُ بِهِ النَّقْبَاتِ. He said, because of this that we do, that indiscriminately we go to any country and we don't consider whether the country is Muslim or kufru. It's one of the reasons why Allah legitimizes and make possible for catastrophe and calamities to befall Muslim. And when this happens to Muslim, on account of our carelessness and sins, we continue to call unto Allah, and it seems as if Allah doesn't hear. Whereas Allah hears us. But because we do not consider the magnificence of Allah, we do not consider the honor of Allah, we do not consider the value of the law of Allah while taking our decisions. The only thing we look at is materialism. The only thing we look at is the economic benefit. The only thing we look at is survival. We don't think about in what way does this thing assist the prospect of a blissful grave. In what way does it assist the prospect of a blissful grave for us, barzakh. And wherever we choose to live, whatever we choose to do, and whatever lies behind our intention, ultimately, a day is coming when we shall leave this world and will be held to account on every decision that we have taken on earth, and we equally be held to account on the basis of our intentions. Inshallah, next week we shall continue the discussion. It's still extensive. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a better understanding of what we have learned today. May Allah never put us to shame in this world and the day of Qiyamah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Jazakumullahu khaira. We sincerely thank the Sheikh for this very wonderful lecture and admonition that he has given us. And very sure we've all learned a lot about migrations, the types, the conditions, and various situations that are pertaining to Hijrah. Now, inshallah, we're going to be taking questions from members of the audience. So anyone that has a question can just raise up his hand, and inshallah, so that we forward the questions to the Sheikh to answer them bi'idhnillah. Assalamu alaikum. So anyone that has questions should please raise up their hand. Okay, so we have Al-Haji. Al-Haji, can ask your question, sir.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. With much appreciation, I want to, when you were talking about, you quoted 2-3 verses of the Quran the other time. I missed the first 2. It's only that of Surah At-Tawbah that I got, on why we should be harsh and hard on the kufr.
Okay. يا أيها النبي جاهد الكفار والمنافق واغلظ عليهم والمنافقين واغلظ عليهم ومأواهم بجهنم وبئس المصير. We provide the number of the verse. Then someone is asking a question here, that can they ask question about what is outside the theme of discussion? Bismillah, tafaddal.
You can ask your question, Sister Rahmat Ibrahim.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My question is on, am I audible, please?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Okay, so my question is on sunrise prayer. A sister of mine asked, she sent to me that she's making some inquiries and she's learning from someone or somewhere, and she was told that process that we should not pray when the sun is just rising, just like we shouldn't pray Nawafil when the sun is setting. That's between Asri and after Asri. Then immediately after Fajr as well, that's sunrise prayer. So she says she's confused, that she has stopped praying sunrise prayer since then. She only observed Salatul Duha. So she wants clarification on that, and I'm like, okay, I know that there is sunrise prayer, but I would try to make inquiry about that.
On the Jahid al-Kuffar wal-Munafiqin, Wagliz alayhim wa ma'wahum jahannam wa bisal masir, is Surah At-Tawbah, verse, I think somewhere around 64, 65, 66. It's still in Tawbah. On the question by our sister that observing prayer at sunrise. Yes, of course, Rasulullah with a categorical statement had forbidden Muslims observing the Salat Ishraq when the sun is just coming out, because Rasulullah identify it with the attitude of the people who watch the sun worshippers, that when when the sun is coming out, it's rising. That's when they go to the field to prostrate before the sun. They pay obeisance to the sun. So to distinguish a Muslim worshipper from such, mushrikun, Rasulullah had now said, had warned us that when the sun is rising, just coming up, we're not going to observe Ishraq. Ishraq is observed as soon as the sun at rising. It is already stable. We observe Ishraq, not when it is just coming out. Aha. And thereafter, Salatul Duha. Salaam alaikum. So that one does not justify that the sister should stop from observing Ishraq or Salatul Duha. No, she only needs to wait a little bit, to be patient until the sun has finally come up. Then she can now observe the Ishraq. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmah. Is there any other person with questions? Okay. So if in the absence of any questions, inshallah, we are going to be calling it a day. And we sincerely thank our Sheikh for this admonition again. And we also implore our listeners to be quite attentive when listening to such admonitions and invite other people, their families, their friends, to be able to benefit from such admonitions. And we pray to Allah to make these admonitions very beneficial to us and useful for us in this world and the hereafter. And on this note, we were going to be ending this particular session. And we thank you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair.